Hello and welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer in Tel Aviv. Ever since the widespread protests broke out in Iran and the regime cracked down brutally on the protesters, and multiple declarations came from President Donald Trump that the U.S. intends to intervene militarily if a weakened Iran does not come to the negotiating table to limit its nuclear and military capabilities and agree to refrain from executing protesters, Israelis have been living on pins and needles. That feeling increased over the past weekend when Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, declared that if the U.S. attacks Iran, it will spark a regional conflict. President Trump's response didn't make us feel any calmer.
Sir, on Iran, the supreme leader today said that U.S. attack could spark a regional war. Do you have any response to that?
Why wouldn't he say that? Of course you're going to say that, but we have the biggest, most powerful ships in the world over there, very close, a couple of days, and hopefully we'll make a deal. If we don't make a deal, then we'll find out whether or not he was right.
With the U.S. military armada at the ready, will an attack happen in days, in weeks? How prepared is Israel to be part of the regional conflict that Khamenei is threatening? Here with me to discuss it all is Haaretz senior defense analyst Amos Harel. He'll talk about Iran and give an update on the progress or lack thereof to build a post-war regime in Gaza and what the view is on this from top Israeli military officials. Our conversation is coming up.
I'm Esther Solomon, editor-in-chief of Haaretz English. Around the world, the fight is on to preserve critical and independent media. Haaretz, Israel's oldest newspaper, upholds its long tradition of accurate, committed, and incisive journalism, refusing to bend its reporting to pressure from any government or leader. A digital subscription to Haaretz gives you up-to-the-minute news and analysis in English from journalists who live Israel's reality and are committed to covering the Middle East and its global repercussions. At the same time, your subscription supports the cause of a free press that holds the powerful to account in Israel and around the world. I invite you to become a subscriber to Haaretz now. Just go to Haaretz.com and use the code Haaretz10, that's Haaretz with the number 10, for 10% off an annual subscription.
Amos Harel, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Alison.
Amos, it feels like such a long time, but honestly, it's just been weeks since the protests erupted in Iran, the brutal crackdown began, and President Donald Trump began talking tough about an attack. Let's start with where we stand right now. We were told for many weeks that it would take time for U.S. warships and equipment to get in position for a potential attack in Iran, and that it wouldn't happen until, well, about now. As we record on Monday, does it seem like everything's in place?
Most of the buildup has already happened. American ships are already in the region. But it seems as if the president has lost a little bit of his appetite for destruction, so to speak. What we see, I think, is on the one hand, growing American pressure on Iran, and on the other hand, some kind of willingness to negotiate. And when we talk about negotiations, then there's a difference between what was on the table about a month ago, which was mostly an American demand for more or less destroying the regime, or for the regime to step down and for democracy to be installed in Iran. And now we're talking about something completely different. Most of the leaks in recent days were mostly around the possibility to limit Iran's nuclear plan. Because if we go back to Israel's war against Iran last June, this was the main event. This is what was discussed. Israel destroyed some Iranian capabilities. The Americans joined in later on, and there was talk of another nuclear agreement which would finally deal with the problem. Right now, what the president is trying to do is to force the Iranians to agree to major concessions regarding their nuclear project. But it doesn't solve the number one issue for most of the Iranians, which is getting rid of the regime.
Is that because, according to intelligence assessments in the U.S. or in Israel or, in military intelligence everywhere, that it's an unrealistic goal to try to topple the regime from the outside through the use of military force by the United States?
Well, Trump is fond of saying almost always that he's capable of what nobody else is. But what we know from the past is that it's very, very hard to force a regime to step down only by using airstrikes. There's one precedent, which is Kosovo in 1999, after about 80 days of a military air campaign by NATO. They managed to force the government to resign. This is a different case. This is no Venezuela and no Kosovo. Iran is a huge country with quite some massive resources. And yet, Iran is also very, very weakened by the events, by the riots. We still don't know how many people were actually killed by the regime, but it's very, very clear that this was the greatest challenge the regime has faced since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. So very weak right now. And I assume what Netanyahu is telling Trump is that if you apply enough force, then somehow the Iranian public would rise again, and this would lead to the final demise of the regime. Yet it hasn't happened before, and I'm not sure that Trump really believes in that. For now, it seems as if the president is going through the motions. He made important statements about a month ago. He said that help is on the way, and now he's tied to these promises and has to do something. And yet, what's the nature of that something? That isn't clear yet. And this is why things are taking a long time. And I'm not sure that this will be solved soon enough. I mean, it could happen, and yet there could be further delays. One more problem that I think people are not really aware of is that actually the American capabilities are quite limited. In the end, the army itself has a problem with resources, has a problem with manpower. America is dealing with lots of conflicts in different arenas, whether it's Russia and Ukraine, China and Taiwan, Gaza, other matters on the table. And I'm not sure that neither Trump or the American military have the stamina to go through a very long campaign. So if Trump could pick another way, if there's a way to actually somehow make progress on the nuclear issues, then I assume there would be more time given to that option before he goes back to the military option.
So it's take advantage of a regime weakened by the protests in order to squeeze out some sort of nuclear and military deal. And he's speaking less and less about actually overthrowing the regime, preventing them from slaughtering protesters, sort of stepping away from that?
Yes, but having said all that, things could still change, and he could be, again, facing pressure to finally act, to put his money where his mouth is, so to speak. But for the time being, when you look at the number of times he has mentioned the nuclear issue in recent days, it seems as if he sees that as a possible way out. That would still be very, very hard, because these are major concessions that the Iranians would need to make. On the other hand, from the Israeli perspective, a nuclear deal perhaps is not enough. I think that there is an appetite here for something more than that. This was discussed during the 12-day war. The war demands inside the Israeli cabinet to go for a regime change. I felt at the time that was far-fetched, that it couldn't be done. But after what we saw in those 2 or 3 weeks of massive riots and demonstrations all over Iran, I would assume that this is not what Netanyahu is looking for. The real question is, can Trump supply that demand? Can he actually go all the way against the Iranian regime? I'm not sure it's in the cards right now.
How much of Trump's ultimatums feel real to you? Does it really feel like he's going after a deal? Or could this be a bluff that there's just so much armament and so many statements committed that the attack is basically already decided on, it's a go, and it's just a question of when?
I don't think it's already decided on. I think that the fact that, as you mentioned, that there's been such a massive military buildup, and the fact that he constantly talked about that for weeks, and that he promised that help is on the way. All of this, in a way, is limiting his room for maneuvering. He doesn't have the ultimate space to do whatever he wants, which is the way the president likes it. This is more complicated than other issues, and everybody in the region is also watching. And of course, the Israeli position here is not necessarily shared by other countries. We see the Saudis sitting on both sides of the fence regarding that, but it's quite clear that the Qataris, for instance, or the Turks and so on, are not really fond of the idea of America attacking Iran directly. This could have, for some of these regimes, devastating consequences. Other countries, some of the Gulf states, perhaps the Emirates, and perhaps some among those people around Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince in Saudi Arabia, may be hoping that this would actually lead to the demise of the regime. But again, the question is how to get from point A to point B. Is there really a way to topple the regime? And how costly would that be? How many people would be killed? How would that affect other countries in the region? What kind of a bloodshed will we be witnessing? And so on. So this is extremely complicated. I don't think anybody knows where we're heading exactly. But for the time being, it seems that it would take some time before the actual decisions are being made. Again, in going back to the short history of this current conflict, demonstrations began late December. January 8th was the height of the demonstrations. It was, in retrospect, it's seen as the moment the momentum was over. The regime brutally managed to overturn the situation and to frighten the protesters. Thousands and thousands were slaughtered on the night and morning of January 8th to January 9th. And the problem was, of course, that since most of Iran was disconnected from the internet, not only did the entire international community, but also Western intelligence agencies, they didn't actually have a full grasp of the situation there. When things gradually began to be understood by those agencies, came the Trump decision to strike on January 14th. And now we know that Israel was on high alert and assuming that America would be ready to strike. And then at the last moment, the president changed his mind and decided not to attack. This is where we are almost 3 weeks later. No decision yet. And we'll have to see how this plays out. Again, I think the fact that it takes so much time has to do with Trump's deliberations. There is no really good option for him. He may be seeing a vision of a different Middle East in a year's time, but right now it's not exactly clear how to get there.
I asked if it might be imminent. Again, we Israelis are sort of on a short fuse these days. Much was made about this meeting over the weekend between U.S. General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the IDF Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir, over the weekend. It was kept very quiet. I believe it happened on Friday, and the news only came out on Sunday. And so that was giving people ideas that an attack was days away.
I'm not sure it's that imminent. There's a possibility, of course, and Zamir wouldn't have left the country under these circumstances if this wasn't a very serious matter. And yet, as far as I can tell, and as far as I hear from the Israeli side, they don't understand this as an American decision already. I think deliberations would continue. There could always be a surprise if you go back to June 12th last year. Then, as Israel already received the green light from Trump to attack Iran, he was talking of sending Witkoff to meet with Al-Aqchi, the Iranian foreign minister, and to discuss a possible nuclear agreement. So, in a way, Trump was deceiving the Iranians at that time. So we cannot rule out the option that this could happen again. And yet, as far as I can see from here, and I have limited vision, I have to admit, it doesn't seem to be immediate. It could happen during the next few weeks, but we haven't seen signs that there was a decision already taken regarding a strike.
We also have conflicting messages from the Iranian officials. Foreign minister, top security official Ali Larijani are talking about achieving a nuclear deal. They're kind of playing along with what Trump is saying. And then we have the saber rattling by Khamenei saying this will be a regional war. So do you think these things are being coordinated from the Iranian side? We have no real way of knowing, but is there any sense in the and the messages coming from Iran? And also, I'm interested in who is passing the messages between the U.S. and Iran in this matter.
So I'm not sure that everything is coordinated. We have to admit that the Iranians are under extreme pressure. Right? Again, the revolt itself, the demonstrations were the worst the Islamic Republic has faced in 46 years. I think they almost had a near-death experience. The regime and probably Khamenei himself, who actually fears to die either by the hands of the protesters or by an American attack. So they're in panic, and they will say a lot of things, and the messages are not necessarily all on point. It's not as if that you can, write down everything that's been said from Iran and realize that this is coordinated. These are all talking points. I think different figures in the regime are saying different stuff regarding this. As for the mediators, there are quite a lot of countries involved. The Qataris, the Emiratis, the Omanis, Turkey, Egypt. I think probably Turkey is the most important mediator right now. And that's, as we know, Erdogan is quite close to Trump. He's one of his favorite leaders in the region. And Turkey has also taken a role in the day after agreement in Gaza. So we know that there are different envoys going to Tehran back and forth and trying to reach some agreement over negotiations at least. I don't know how serious that is, that there seems to be quite a gap between American demands or American minimum and Iranian maximum and so on. We'll have to see how this plays out. The main aspect would be how crucial the regime sees this moment. Do they really fear that this could be the end of them? If indeed that's the issue, then they will probably be willing to make more concessions, reach more of a compromise than they were willing in the past. And of course, there's the historical precedent is from 1988, Khomeini's decision to stop the war with Iraq, what was known as the Gulf War at the time, is now known as the Iran-Iraq War of 1980 to 1988. Iran, for a long time, said that it would continue by any means necessary. But after a chapter, which was called the War on the Cities, when Iraq launched massive ballistic missiles attacks against Iran, Khomeini was forced to reach a ceasefire, and the war more or less ended in a draw. So we have this example from the past of the regime behaving realistically in order to survive. I think that this can still happen again, in spite of the fact that there are quite important American demands from them. From an Israeli perspective, there's another issue. Israel is not only concerned about the nuclear threat, it's also mostly focused on the ballistic missiles. And as you know, Israel had quite some success in 2025 and during the last war at destroying production lines, but it's quite worried about the fact that the Iranians have recovered very quickly. So this is a major issue for Israel, and Israel would demand, or at least try to influence the U.S. to force the Iranians to put a limit on their ballistic missile production, and also to stop their support of terrorist and guerrilla organizations around the region. Now, both of these demands are mostly an Israeli concern. I'm not sure that Trump sees this as a matter of urgency.
It's an Israeli concern because nuclear or not nuclear, if they have massive missile capabilities due to mass production, they could overwhelm the skies of Israel with thousands of missiles and overwhelm our air defense systems.
Yes, and we remain in the region. This is our problem more than it's an American problem. And also, if we go back to the 12-day war, it's true that the previous assessments of the military said that there will be somewhere between 200 and 800 deaths as a result of a war in Iran and as a result of missiles being launched against the Israeli home front. In the end, as we know, there were only 30 casualties. And yet, you remember very well as well that the last few days after the Iranians tried and missed hitting strategic targets, what they went for was just a barrage of missiles towards Israeli population centers. And what we saw was massive destruction in places like Tel Aviv, Bat Yam, Holon, Beersheva, Haifa, and so on. Whenever an Iranian ballistic missile hit, it was a very different experience than Katyusha, Grad rockets launched from Gaza or from Lebanon. And you can judge this by the people you talk to every day. People are much more concerned about a second round with Iran than they are concerned about Hezbollah or Gaza or other frontiers. There's a lot of fear among Israelis regarding that, and that has to do with the sort of emotional residue from last time. And I think that Netanyahu is aware of that, and the Iranians are aware of that as well. They were defeated. They didn't surrender, but they were defeated last June. And yet what they saw in the last few days of the war, the fact that they managed to hit Israeli population centers, makes them a little bit hopeful about the damage they can bring next time.
Amos, it's Iran that has us getting the jitters in Israel at the moment. But while I've got you here, before I let you go, can you give us a quick update regarding the rebuilding of Gaza, the arrangements long term of Gaza? As we record today, the Rafah crossing into Gaza has been reopened. Is that significant? And the headline of your last analysis is Trump is determined to launch phase 2 of his Gaza plan. The Israeli government's last hope is that he fails. So can you talk about that and talk about Netanyahu's narrative as he looks at Gaza, the situation, and ahead to an election year?
So the U.S. is focused on stage 2. As we mentioned, the president has quite a lot on his plate, but he still believes that he could go through, that he could continue with his original plan. As you remember, he forced Netanyahu, he coerced Netanyahu into signing the hostage deal last October. And now comes time for some attempt at rebuilding Gaza. There are many obstacles on the way. And that headline that you mentioned was focused on the fact that the Israeli government, first of all, it doesn't have much illusions about Hamas's good intentions, of course. But it's more than that. In the end, both Netanyahu and his partners, he has a political problem because the goals of the war in Gaza were not achieved. He did not reach a final and conclusive victory the way he promised his voters. And his messianic right-wing partners in the government, such as Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, are of course unhappy because they want a transfer of Palestinian population from Gaza, and they want to rebuild settlements in Gaza. And this, of course, has not been achieved either. So for him, for Netanyahu, he's waiting for the right moment. He's waiting for a chance to tell Trump, "I told you so," and to get a green light for another Israeli campaign against Gaza, this time with no hostages being held by Hamas. So his hands are not tied. This is what he's hoping for. From Trump's perspective, we've seen his son-in-law Kushner heavily involved here again. And this is about a possibility of recovery for Gaza, some kind of reconstruction period, and hopefully forcing Hamas to step down. But we know that this is the main obstacle here. It's not about opening the Rafah crossing and allowing 150 Palestinians to pass through it every day. It's about much larger plans in the long run. The Emiratis are involved. Other countries are willing to spend billions of dollars. But if they do that, then Hamas needs to be dismantled from its weapons. And as we know, Hamas is not about to agree to that if it's not forced to give up its weapons. And this is the main obstacle. There are many discussions about other things, the International Stability Force, what kind of technocrats would rule Gaza and so on. But the main event here is about Hamas's weapons. If they're not dismantled, then it will be hard to proceed. And Netanyahu would have a point in his arguments with Trump demanding that this is dealt with before other issues. One issue that is out of the way, thankfully, is the fate of the hostages. The last hostage body of policeman Ron Gvili was returned last week. It was actually retrieved by the IDF itself. And now there's less of an issue regarding that. It remains a huge emotional scar for the Israeli public, but at least this is solved. And I may remind you that when we had those discussions 3, 4, 5 months ago, I assumed that some of these cases would remain filed as missing in action, that it would be impossible to locate every last body of a hostage in Gaza. Well, it turned out that Hamas was actually willing to cooperate, that Hamas is more in control of Gaza than we believed. It was able to come up with the assets, so to speak. And this is where we are. This is one issue that's off the table, which is quite important from an Israeli perspective.
Amos Harel, Senior Defense Analyst at Haaretz. As usual, thank you so much for your great reporting, your insight, and keeping an eye on so many fronts for us.
Thank you, Alison.
And that wraps things up for another episode of the Haaretz Podcast. Thanks to my guest, Amos Harel, and to producer and editor, Adi Shacham. If you'd like to keep listening to our podcast and make sure you never miss an episode, don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple, on Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please, if you're so inclined, leave a comment or a 5-star rating so more people can find us. And to keep up with all the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, don't forget to subscribe to and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.